do you say, if my camera is still in the region, what he's doing diplomatically and how you see things right now? The Ethiopian government had a statement about TPLF accepting back the Indian mediation. Do you think it's a positive step? How do you see things in ground right now?
Well, Special Envoy Hammer is still in the region. He's wrapping up 2 weeks in the region. He's remained actively engaged with the government of Ethiopia, with Tigray regional authorities, with the African Union, and with international partners to seek to advance an important effort to bring about peace. He met on September 12th with AU's High Representative, Mr. Osanjo. He met on the 13th with UN Special Representative to the Secretary General Hannah Tete, and Assistant Secretary Fee, for her part, was this week attending the inauguration of President Ruto in Kenya, and she engaged in discussions regarding the ongoing violence in Ethiopia. More broadly, we are increasingly concerned by the growing military activity in northern Ethiopia. We strongly condemn the resumption of hostilities. There's no military solution to this conflict. These actions are inconsistent with the government of Ethiopia and Tigrayan regional authorities' stated willingness to close. And we call on both the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray regional authorities to halt immediately their military offensives and to pursue a negotiated settlement through peace talks under the auspices of the African Union. We commend and support the AU's diplomatic efforts to start talks as soon as possible. We welcome the ongoing commitment in AU-led peace talks by both parties, the government of Ethiopia and the Tigray regional authorities. And in coordination with international partners, we have proven our readiness to actively support this AU-led peace process. We also call on Eritrea to withdraw to its borders, and for Eritrea and others to cease fueling this conflict. These actions are increasing tensions throughout the region. They are worsening the humanitarian situation at a time of pronounced drought and food insecurity. We continue to stand with the people of Ethiopia and will continue to be the largest donor of humanitarian aid and assistance to Ethiopia.
Hello, welcome to UMD Media's weekly show, the H panel. Today we'll be talking about the war peace road to and from Djibouti. The full panel, Professor Ezekiel Gabisa, Faisal Roble, and Duke Burbridge are here. Welcome, gentlemen. It's again good to have you in the panel.
Thank you.
Awesome. So we will start as usual. We kicked off with Ned Price's press conference today, and I think that's relevant for our talk today. We'll start with what was the highlight for you over the past 7 days. Ezekiel, what is the highlight? What stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Of course, nothing overshadows the war and the attempt to find a negotiated end to the war. That's a given. Much of the world today knows that Ethiopia is in the midst of a civil war. Much of the world knows, not all, that the conflict in Tigray, the Tigray region, has resumed and has caused humanitarian disaster of, you could say, biblical proportions. But in the midst of all that news that we care about, not the entire world, of course, but some strange things were happening in Ethiopia. Among the many strange happenings, one stood out to me, and it occurred today. And that is the visit of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia to the Oromia region, visiting wheat fields and making an announcement that Ethiopia's plan to export wheat this year to the rest of the world is on track. He is unfettered, he is unsubdued, he can make claims like that in the middle of what I just described was happening in Ethiopia. Now, the strange thing in that this is like a split screen to me is that the World Food Program is begging on behalf of Ethiopia, begging contributions, financial contributions to buy wheat for Ethiopia. But 3 or 4 weeks ago, the World Food Program with other organizations bought about 23,000 tons of wheat from Ukraine to feed 1.5 million Ethiopians for 1 month. At the time, the Prime Minister simply dismissed that, saying that this is a conspiracy. I did not make that up. Said that is a conspiracy to overshadow our effort to become wheat exporter in the world. Now, because of man-made and natural conditions, millions of Ethiopians are facing food shortages. They're faced with starvation. The climate change or climate event contributing the situation, aggravating it, is reportedly not seen in the last 40 years. And it has occurred, this rain failure has occurred over the last 4 years in Ethiopia and the entire region, Horn of Africa region. Because of this, 24 million Ethiopians face starvation. In addition to this number, about 21 million people are already facing high levels of acute food insecurity and malnutrition across Ethiopia. Over 3.5 million livestock, which Ethiopian pastoralist families rely upon for their sustenance and livelihoods and their subsistence, basically, have died in the southern and eastern part of Ethiopia. The price of food, the cost of food for families has increased, if you believe government numbers, between January and June 2022 has increased by 33%. If that's the government supported number, then you could guess that the hike could be much more than that, maybe double the price, making my friends at this Addis Ababa University, with whom that I've worked, who in good times were able to purchase vehicles, are now ride chauffeurs. Like ride is the sort of a Uber in Ethiopia. That's what they're doing. My own friends, professors at Addis Ababa University. So where all of this is happening, the Ethiopian Prime Minister, in the midst of a civil war, starvation and threat of famine and unprecedented violence, he has time for some excursion and some PR work and some diversionary news making to divert attention of Ethiopians and the Ethiopians by and large from the catastrophe that is unfolding in the northern part of the country. Now, the strange thing is that for how long can you deceive all the people all the time? That's really strange. That what stood out to me today.
Thank you, Pascal. Faisal?
Yes, I think several small things stood out for me. I think the first one is the visit of Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to Washington, D.C. And as of today, he paid visit to the State Department, IMF, and the Office of Secretary of Defense. And basically, I think two fronts or two issues really were important to Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. And one is security and how to fight Al-Shabaab. And this time, he really paired the military aspect of fighting Al-Shabaab with an ideological approach. He was talking at the CSIC. Is it CSIS? Yeah.
CSIS.
And he basically said today that only defeating Al-Shabaab through means of military would not get to the target. So they are pairing that military aspect with, who owns Islam, and who has the right version. And basically he argued that al-Shabaab is not even holding to a true Islam, nor is it holding to an Islam that the Muslims belong to. So he mentioned the names that the commanders of al-Shabaab usually adapt, such as Zubaydah, this and that, which are very, very, very Arabic, as opposed to indigenous Somali names. And Somalis are really unique in the Islamic world, like the Yorubas. Ali Mazrui mentioned and said that two Muslim communities that are very African and very Muslim are Somalis and Yoruba. So he went through the list of Somali names such as Qaud and Aliso, what have you, which are indigenous. So he was just drawing this line between being Arab and Muslim and radical, if you will, and being Muslim and Somali, indigenous and African. I thought that may be a line to expand in the future. With terrorism in Somalia, also there is a robust movement by clan groups who armed themselves, such as in Iran and some parts of the country, where people are no longer waiting for the government is done up army and troops to come. They literally did this grassroots militia kind of thing and really kicking butt, if you will, so to speak, in many parts of Iran region. So I think my kudos to those groups at Iran. The other issue that is stood for me, which is related, and Hassan mentioned the troops that Farmajo, the former president, sent to Eritrea, and he said basically Isaias confirmed to him that he didn't want to, bring back the Somali soldiers because there were political crisis, and basically now that Somalia doesn't have the political crisis, the 5,000 plus troops that are in Asmara, given the current situation, when will they come back and how will they come back? Which, in a sense, needs to be paired with the last call that Isaias did, which is to call all former Eritrean soldiers who are, 55 or younger. Literally, people who are on the edge of being senior citizens are now being called. And a lot of commentators are reading very significant issues into that, one of which is Isaias running out of soldiers, the young supply of troops is dwindling and drying up. Is he really carrying a lot of casualties? All these are scenarios that are possible. We don't have our finger as to what happened to, but this really indicates that Isaias is no longer comfortable with the level of army that he has, and he's looking for a long trajectory and may need some more troops. And he's now going back to people who are damaged, who no longer have the right training, who have been out of commission for a long time. How those people will fight for him, it's anybody's guess. It just doesn't say good things and positive things about the status of Isaias's military situation at this point in time.
Great. Thank you, Faisal. I think maybe it will be raised later. The commander of Tigray Army this week was mentioning about how Ethiopian soldiers are being transported by Ethiopian Airlines to Massawa and to Eritrea and so on, to your point, Faisal. Duke, what stood out for you over the past 7 days?
Well, there were a few things. Certainly
By the way, happy birthday to you.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, my birthday stood out to me. Aside from that, there were some interesting developments, diplomatic developments that they to know whether or not they were significant developments or not is something that remains to be seen. Very much the Tigrayan government offering this idea of peace, taking a little while for the Ethiopian government to respond to it, but eventually responding that they would join peace talks, possibly. I mean, nobody knows whether or not this is actually going to happen, which is a very frightening thing, because even when they get to the table, nobody knows what's going to happen. And then after they leave the peace table, nobody knows what's going to happen. So to have all of this ambiguity up front of whether or not they're even going to talk is makes the whatever progress has happened very, up in the air. But today, there was a piece of good news from the Food Cluster Group that puts out a report every week about distribution of food. And it appears that 1.5 million people in Tigray received food over the past week. Now, that's the biggest 1 week total that there's been since back in September, when I started, covering the actual, the distribution. This may be a little bit of makeup. There were a couple of weird number shifts a couple of months ago, so that it might be counting some food that was distributed a little earlier. I'm not sure, but that's a remarkable feat to accomplish in 1 week. The sad part is that all of the food that is distributed in Tigray is not being replenished at the warehouses. The siege is still on. There's no trucks are getting in, no convoys are getting in, and it's very worrisome to see UN officials and others talking about the conflict has prevented these things from happening, as if these trucks are trying to drive through battlefields, which is not necessarily the case. The logistics cluster has made very clear the reason that the trucks are not able to get in to Tigray is because they cannot get authorization. And that is something that needs to change immediately, not when they start to see people, not when they run out of food at these, hubs where they've pushed food out to, and now they're distributing. It needs to stop. The siege needs to be lifted immediately before we get to that case. It's the hardest thing in the world for a humanitarian operation to try to respond to a famine to the degree that it is in Tigray with a stop and start sort of supply chain. So good news that people got food, bad news that they didn't expand it any further than they had as far as geographically. Also bad news that the areas that are being affected by the conflict directly are not getting food. And bad news that the food isn't being replenished at the warehouses.
Thank you for that update, Duke. So let's go for the topic of the day. So today we want to talk about the war peace road to and from Djibouti. So we covered last week what happened in Djibouti, and we saw that Ethiopia was represented by Gideon Timotheus and Redwan Hussein, and Tigray sent Tzadkan and Getachew Reda, General Tzadkan and Getachew Reda. And what happened, or how are we reading things that unfolded after Djibouti? Scale.
From the information that I have, what transpired at the Djibouti meeting is that the United States had, through the special envoy and the chair of the negotiations, he put down 4 points that would be discussed and, of course, signed. And this was actually pushed by the Secretary of State himself, Anthony Blinken. It's not just the special envoy. So it was at the behest and urging and pressure put by the Secretary of State that they actually met. And when he instructed, and probably through the special envoy, both sides were instructed to send people who had the mandate to negotiate and to sign. People who were competent enough to negotiate. Remember last year I talked about that there should be some military people who know what ceasefire actually means. They should know the positions of the belligerents. They should know the distance of shells and all that kind of military knowledge. Someone needs to be at the table. When they were sent, the Minister of Justice and the advisor to the Prime Minister on security matters, who actually was sent to the Prime Minister's office as a way to his retirement, where number one, they did not know what to discuss. Number two, they were not authorized. They were told that the Tigrayan Defense Forces had been obliterated, and these two individuals were coming to surrender or negotiate the terms of surrender to the government of Ethiopia, and that they said in the deliberation. That was just a strange thing, and they were asked where did this happen, and General Arkan took out a map and he said, "Show us where you obliterated it." And in all areas, the militaries are in standoff situation, and in some areas, your military had been damaged. And the special envoy noted in approval. So the two people that were representing Ethiopia were unprepared to negotiate anything, much less deliberate on the four issues that the United States put on the table. That is unhindered access to for humanitarian aid delivery, resumption of services, agreement on peace principles. That's one of the things that he said. And the fourth one, I kind of eludes me right now. On those 4 points, they were absolutely not ready to negotiate. So they said we have to go back to Ethiopia, and get more further instruction on how to proceed. And that's how the meeting ended. So they met. The Ethiopians presented this idea that they were there to accept the terms of negotiations. That didn't happen. So the negotiations or supposed negotiations ended without any negotiations. So they agreed to meet again in about a month. So that's what happened in Djibouti.
Great. UMD Media also received that when they learned about what happened in the area of the debit front. That was actually the subject matter of both Getachew Redda's and General Tadesse's pressers this week. That was, like Professor Skel said, the opposite of what they were told when they left Addis for Djibouti. Faisal, on this war peace road to and from Djibouti, what are you reading? You have been very explicit about what the TDF is about, all that, but maybe let's couple it with what happened during and after Djibouti.
Yes, no, I think what happened in Djibouti is very much explained by Scale, and I think according to Getachew Redda's press this week also, it's consistent. What Scale said is consistent with the expectation that Aret Kilo had, where they printed thousands and thousands of T-shirts that showed victory of march into Mekelle. So definitely, whatever information they had, it was just I cannot tell at this point in time if they even believed or it was just a way to really mislead. Because if Abiy was serious about finally, even with a victory, if he was serious to really seal the deal and finally say we have a victory, let these people surrender, he will not be sending the two people that we already said last week in our discussion that they cannot make big decisions for Ethiopia. They both are lightweight. They are not really coming from the core political constituents of PP and what have you. So I think, the Getachew Redda's press to tell us and give us a detailed information about what had happened in several fronts, particularly in the Western Tigray front, which he said, and I still recall, within a distance of 90 miles around the Tekese River, they jammed close to over 90,000 not well trained, less armed, not ready type soldiers, knowing that the other side was prepared to hit them very hard. And I think when Reda was telling that story, you could tell his humility and the pain that he was just feeling, and any human being would feel that. Now, Ethiopian side never said anything about that, but we are getting enough information from Middle Road or more or less from Hara media who are reporting that the entire Amhara hospital structure is filled with wounded soldiers from that front, basically from Kombolcha all the way up to Debre Marcos of Gojam, which is really like a distance from where the war took place because of lack of availability of enough beds. Wounded soldiers from that front are there. You could even see from some clips that wounded soldiers are being laid and given as a way to a place to rest and be helped in the lobbies of these hospitals, in the Gondar and Bahrdar hospitals, in the lobby. These are huge corridors and lobbies. So basically today some of the information coming from Addis Ababa is that the Arat Kilo government is trying to also regulate, not ban, but regulate how people express their grief. When to do a huge grieving ceremony, how to do that, because finally what Getachew Reda expressed is hitting home, and it's coming, for people to see exactly what had happened despite the government's propaganda. As to the northern area where Shiraro is concerned, I think there seems to be a stalemate. I think they both are playing, their own strategies. It is understandable that from what Getachew and General Tadesse said, they probably don't want to fight at this point in time in the city and probably pull out and see if they can get a chance to later on hit. On the Eritrean side, this is the terrain that really helps mechanized infantry type, where they can just shoot from 130 miles, 40 miles with big guns, and that's what has been happening. But I think we are getting also information that this is going to prove to be a very tough front to watch. So uh, I th- I think I think Ethiopia is finally probably finding the limit to the human wave. The human wave is no longer working because a human wave that was designed, from what we understand, was supposed to be quick and fast, and it's not gonna happen. That's not happening, and there is a lot of discomfort in the high-ranking Oromo politicians who are in the PP. I was told that one very well-placed Oromo PP person really did not like and expressed in such a way that what Isaias is doing through the Amhara may serve for the short term, but be detrimental to the Oromo cause. This is somebody, and that will come out soon, but this is somebody who is really, if you call the top 10 people around Abiy, he would be probably 8 or 9 and now stationed somewhere. He felt from the person that he was having conversation with, felt a huge discomfort that Isaias and what Isaias is showing today could really be detrimental to the Oromo cause, meaning, helping and training hardliner Amaras who, although they belong to PP, whom he sees as a potential danger to the Oromo cause.
Thank you, Faisal. Duke, when we started today's show, I played Ned Price's presser today, and he was mentioning about the willingness from both sides in terms of the peace talks expressed in public, all that, and but he was saying what they are seeing on the ground. is opposite of that. And he also mentioned Eritrea's role and going out of to its side of the border, all that. One thing that we received a report today was as well when the European Union envoy was in Addis and meeting the deputy prime minister. Uh, the same happened like as Gail was referring. So he couldn't answer some of the questions she was asking. And he said, I should talk to Abiy and the prime minister. And when he met her again, he said, we will agree to, come into the peace talks, provides that you don't say it in public. That's what, the kind of game play and so on. So as a person who is interested and works for peace, all that, how do you read all this process, the public and the private?
Yeah, it feels like what's going on in Addis is very narrative driven, where they have to keep up this thing of we're winning the war, the TPLF is on its last legs, we got the TDF where we won them, and it's just going to be we're printing up shirts for our victory that hasn't happened yet. And that is, I mean, it's trying to keep a dying show on the road, and when it gets to all of that propaganda is, I mean, every government does it to some extent. You're not going to hear a lot of governments come out and say we're losing this war, we're in real trouble. But there has to be a functional mentality of, when you get to, the talks with the special envoy, or where you're making plans, or where you're creating strategy, you have to live in reality. It just seems like it's the Addis bubble bumping up against the Tigray reality that you see on the ground, and that is where there's a big disconnect. And unfortunately, it feels like the diplomats that come over there from the United States, from the European Union, from the UN, are also are living in that bubble, that bubble in Addis Ababa, where everything's going well. We're going to be exporting wheat by the end of the day. Like, everything's going great. And that doesn't prepare them to engage with Tigray, with people that are looking at famine, starvation, and looking at the fact that they haven't been beaten in any military confrontation in quite some time. And so all of that bubble has to pop at some point, and these guys have to talk about real things. And we're not seeing that. We're just seeing people come up there and, oh yeah, I got to go back and talk to the boss. We'll see if we can do this. We'll see if we can do that. These stalling tactics, because the narrative is more important than the reality. The reality, I don't think, has hit everybody that it needs to in Addis Ababa. That there is, I mean, there was certainly the reality of the famine, the reality of the starving civilians. Those things, if they have hit, they're being ignored. But the reality of the fact that when you have these troops that are fresh recruit, I mean, we saw most of them get recruited in the past year of these big recruitment drives. Anybody can join. When these guys start collapsing, when these divisions, these groups start collapsing, it becomes contagious. It can take over an army. It can drive the army back to Addis. And that is something that I think that they need to be afraid of, is that if the conflict really does break horribly for Addis, you could see something devastating happen. You could see, something close to a state collapse. I mean, this is something that happened with Yemen. This is something that I've seen in other conflicts, where they just start collapsing back to the capital, and then it's over. And if they can't understand that that's a possibility, that's a potential outcome, that losing is a potential outcome, then they're not going to be able to negotiate in good faith. And if the U.S. is going to still, drink the Kool-Aid about everything's going well for Addis and nobody's blocking aid and everything like that, then they're also going to be detached from reality, and they're not going to be able to do their job. So what I see is people struggling to understand the gravity and the reality of the situation. It gets lost a little bit in all the diplomacy, all the State Department, nonsense. But if they can't come to terms with what's going on, I don't see how they're going to make a lot of progress.
That's a good point. I think maybe that gives me a segue to the question for Haskell. When I listened to Getachew Reda this week, and when I listened to Tadesse Warada, these two guys are, you can, if you will, representing the political arm and the military arm, senior people, all that. They seem to me be desperately trying to bring reality to Ethiopia. I mean, when they were speaking in Amharic, they were trying too hard, to say, this is what's happening. Please, it's not going to work. People are dying, all this, all that. So, Ezekiel, again, you have been always hammering on the fact that how the prime minister creates, to use Duke's word, a bubble in Addis around him, like the wheat visitation today, all that. So, how did you hear? How did you read what Tadesse Warada and Getachew Reda, in my view, were trying hard to hammer to, push in a reality check?
After the first round, when the Tigray Defense Forces got to the outskirts of Addis Ababa, about within 100 kilometers, and returned to Tigray, one of the things that the TPLF perfected in fighting against the Derg government, in governing Ethiopia, is what they call Gumgama, evaluation. They're really good at that. They evaluate. This is almost a culture in TPLF that they always evaluate. And when they returned to Tigray, they did an extensive evaluation of what they did right and what they did wrong. What you see in General Tadesse, a calm man always, he's always been a calm person. You know him personally. He's not boisterous, he's not bombastic, but he is very calm and collected this time, even to my own surprise. And it's the result of the evaluation. They decided not to brag about their exploits at all. They made that conscious decision. No gloating after victory. At the end of the day, it's human beings, other Ethiopians, that are also dying on the other side for a cause that they do not believe in. And they also made a decision not to report on the death and the mayhem and everything that occurs in the battlefield, especially in the area that Faisal talked about, in the Debit area, within 90 square meters. They have put about 90,000 soldiers. Even that, they did not really want to did not report on it. In fact, they told even journalists not to report the carnage that occurred in that area. So that is the result of their evaluation. They made a conscious effort. They made a conscious decision to make sure that they did not antagonize the rest of Ethiopia. And it is working. It's working in the Amhara region. So that's a decision on their part. On the part of Addis, yes, I am always talking about the person at the top, because that's where everything flows. Now, in Addis Ababa, is it a bubble? Sometimes when you're surrounded by able people and all that, you could consider that is a bubble. You don't get all kinds of information from all sides. That I understand, but that's not really what is happening here. Number one, the man in Arat Kilo is delusional. He has decided not to listen to anybody. I know this, for God's sake. I know. He had decided not to listen to everybody. All of his minions, they were gathered, for instance, over the weekend in several places to celebrate the new year. And what they were talking about was that they have prayed to God, and God had told them, these are the Christians, that God had promised them that nothing is going to overcome their effort to become a prosperous and peaceful country. That's on course is what they were talking when they met in I don't want to name them, when they met in some places to celebrate the New Year's. That was what they were talking about. That Ethiopia was mentioned in the Bible 300 times. Ethiopia cannot be defeated. Ethiopia atishanef. And look, that's not all. That's not all. There is an instruction from the Prime Minister Office to all of his ministers and high-ranking officers not to talk about defeat at all. Even if they hear about defeat, they don't talk. It's because he said that if you talk defeat, defeat is what you get. If you talk victory, victory is what you get. This is straight from the gospel, the prosperity gospel. Name it and you claim it and you get it. That's exactly what is happening. It's not just delusional. You just do not believe what is going on. It is, nobody evaluates him. Nobody gives him information. The generals are not getting sufficient information. He has selected his famous and favorite generals and is working with them. Even soldiers from the battlefield cannot pick up a cell phone and talk to their relatives about defeat. Even as they see defeat, death, destruction around themselves, they're not allowed to speak. So that is what is going on. But there are indications that Faisal started to talk about. The indications are that, yes, the wounded are overwhelming hospitals. But in Gondar, did you see that it was in the stadium that they were treating the wounded? In the Gondar stadium? And the Gondar stadium is not the field where they play sports. The entire stadium itself was filled with wounded. Hospitals, the wounded are sleeping on floors outside the hospitals. So those are indications about how the ferocity of these battles are. It's not only that. Ahmed Shide, the finance minister, has informed all governments to return non-salary budget that was allocated to them this year. They have to return it to the treasury, all government agencies. The business owners, the well-to-do in Ethiopia, they have been asked to contribute in millions to complete the war. That's what they said. To finish, to complete the war, which means they are really on the verge of victory. They're missing just a few dollars. So if they contribute that, they will just take it over to victory. The Central Committee of the PP was gathered yesterday along with regional government officials. They were instructed to go back to their, after the meeting, after the president of the PP spoke to them about how good the Ethiopian National Defense Forces are doing. He told them not to worry about anything, but go back to your respective zones and regional states and govern. Just do the governing. There is nothing to be worried about. So all of those are indications, in addition to the wounded. These are indications that they're telling all government offices to return what was allocated to them this year. So, people could make up their mind. Maybe this is not what was happening, but this is the information that I'm getting here is that there is a total ban on information about the war in the north. And as Duke said, really to overcome your challenges, you have to acknowledge it first. If you don't acknowledge it, it will come home to roost.
Thank you, Skel. Faisal, talking about again the reality check. We learned yesterday that the IMF, which, if you remember, we covered it in August, maybe in July, I guess, when the IMF was very curious and keen to support Ethiopia and instructing about the peace progress, all that, and so on. So yesterday they came up with no updates, and the September mission that was scheduled for this month, they're saying they don't know when that's going to happen because of the renewed conflict. So what is your take on this? What has happened in terms of what Tigray is saying was in this week.
Very interesting. I'm glad you raised that because just to compare, and I'll touch that, compare that to what IMF told Hassan Sheikh Mohamud today, that Somalia is approaching its completion point, meaning that the debt forgiveness program is progressing very well, and IMF is looking Somalia in a very prospective way, as opposed to Ethiopia, where Mr. Rice, who is the IMF guy, basically said no update, nothing will happen, which means that the Ethiopian folder at the IMF is stagnant, and probably they will not be engaging Ethiopia with more new programs. I think it's a telling of what's happening with the economy. The fact that as of yesterday, the dollar to the birr in Giga hit 100 plus birr. So for $1 is now almost 100 plus birr, whereas the official is 90 birr, I think. And I think a scale earlier touched, basically Ethiopia doesn't have any economy to talk about, despite what Abiy says in terms of exporting wheat and what have you. It's pie in the sky. He's just talking about something that he doesn't have at his hand. So yeah, the whole economy is in shambles. I think we covered that issue in detail since we started this program, and now again it's coming home to roost. Let me just touch the war situation, and where you had two big names in TDF TPLF representing the Tigray side, people who can make decisions on the spot, don't have to call Dr. Debrazyon. And here is an expansive information both to the world as well as to his constituents how the war is going on. Yes, absolutely. Somebody may say covering from his vantage point of view, but everybody who knows, and Skel mentioned this, who knows him in person, I don't know him, but everybody who knows, including people who oppose the Tigray position, really attest to the fact that this man is a no-nonsense guy, a man who just says facts the way they are, not posterous and what have you. So I think a lot of people who are in the bubble will take this man's word is very seriously. That is the personality that he has built for the years. Now, why is the Abiy side really showing a posture to the public about the war and then something private? And here is where we need to theorize and understand from, when wars happen and political crises happen, how do people handle different groups? I think Abiy is not afraid only the current war. I think what Abiy is afraid, in my opinion, and his entourage, is what happens after the war. TDF knows what would happen after the war. I think they would renegotiate the state formulation of Ethiopia with other groups. And that's why in the peace points, there was the element of an inclusive, deliberation throughout the country, and also that everybody should be participant, the big, the powerful, but also groups that are small, like the Walaita, the Hadia, the Benishangul, what have you. That is a hopeful sign for TDF, Ola, Somali groups, that they see at the end of the tunnel. What does Abiy see at the end of the tunnel? We know that the war will not, at the end of the war, will not really reward him, because war is never reward unless you squash your opposition. And we talked, and both Scale and Duke touched that TDF, TPLF is not a force that can be squashed. Even if they capture Mekelle like last time, this is not going to be the end of the war. As a matter of fact, I was reading a piece where even Chris Kalfam mentioned something about the war in Eritrea in the 1970s, and then he was warning the Derg, please take a different way. You cannot win the war the way it is. These guerrillas, these groups are vested in the protection of their group. He's talking about the EPLF at the time and TPLF. The same situation exists with TPLF now. You cannot really squash, despite all the no more movement, all those fascistic languages that say, get rid of Tigray, get rid of TPLF, what have you. That's pie in the sky. That's children is, singing words. I think the challenge for Abiy, and here is we need to have some power to convince him that he can have a stake in the future. Abiy sees the future something that will not reward him or his group. He has seen history that the Derg was never rewarded. I think Haile Mariam was never rewarded after the revolt of the youth. I think he is not investing in the future. He's investing in the current situation. So anytime there is a prospect for peace, he has to sabotage. And there is the difference. That's what I said last week. There is the difference between, somebody who's negotiating with a pessimism and somebody who's negotiating with optimism. TDF, TPLF is negotiating with optimism about the future. Abiy is not negotiating with optimism in the future. And I think people like Hammer know that, because if you just watched the first statement that the U.S. representative just read, it looks like Mike Hammer's doors to Abiy and his team is closed, because he mentioned the AU, he mentioned Hammer's engagement with the United Nations, he mentioned Faye's engagement with the Kenyan government. This time he did not say that Hammer is engaging with the Ethiopian Authority or Abiy. That tells me that the doors are even closing, and they read this. They know that Abiy is not focusing on a future where peace deal is reached. And I think that's the problem we have with this war at this point in time.
Thank you, Faisal. Duke, I mean, again, talking about how Ethiopia is engaging the European Union, African Union, and the US. We heard this week as well the new Kenyan president appointed the former president the special envoy for Ethiopia and DRC. I think they are talking about Tigray, obviously. So how do you see this playing out in terms of how the international community, your interest is on the humanitarian, you can also have that lens in answering this question. So how do you see this unfolding in the coming days?
I thought it was very surprising yesterday when they announced the Kenyan special envoy. I mean, just so we needed another special envoy, but this one could actually be a big deal, because I don't think they would have announced it without collaboration with the existing envoys group. I think that there was some coordination there. I hope that what we might be seeing is the formation of what the mediation process might look. I don't want to say post Obasanjo, but with him in a very different role, because I don't think they have the appetite in DC to tell him to move aside, or for the UN to tell him to move aside, or for the AU for that matter, despite spending a year doing absolutely nothing to really improve the situation. Maybe this is a formation of the next stage of mediation. I think Zig and Faisal made some very good points about just the state of delusion that goes into this. And sometimes the only thing you can do in those cases is shut the door or at least put a requirement on conversations that we have to have them on planet Earth and dealing with reality, which is going to be a tall bar for someone to get over. But this is where we need to go, and it is the prosperity gospel, as he said. I mean, it's, if you don't believe that they're winning, if you don't believe that everything's going well, then you're not a believer and you're not welcome. And that's how your circle gets a lot smaller, and your perspective gets a lot smaller. But I hope that the move in Kenya, some of the statements from the United States, I wish that they would stop trying to find a middle ground through everything. I mean, I'm the there are some very clear nuances to this conflict about, who's blocking food, who's who's conducting drone strikes, for goodness sakes. They need to get to show people that they're actually paying attention and they actually understand the situation would be a benefit right here to be a little bit more specific. But hopefully they can get something done with a new special envoy. It would be great. It seems like they're trying to keep a special envoy there almost at all times. I mean, it's, you had Hammer and then you had Weber coming right after. So this would be great if Kenya's taking a more active role, because I think that's where progress was made before, was in that parallel track of negotiation that was happening in Kenya for a while before the elections sort of shut it down, and the Ethiopian government sort of shut it down too. But so I think any movement, any new movement with Kenya is probably a good thing. I mean, of course, who knows? I mean, we don't know how it's going to turn out, but I think it augurs well for Tigray right now.
Thank you, Luke. Still, before I ask you about how this might unfold and your final thoughts, I just want to play. This is Haile Gebrselassie speaking about how he sees, the foreign intervention in terms of peacemaking, how he compares Ethiopia with the rest of the nation. The reason I'm playing that is because he's, one of the celebrities in Ethiopia, but also the fact that that gives, I think, a very dangerous impression. Let me play that, and I want to hear what you and Faisal think.
ተፈጥሮ ለብዙ ሺህ ዓመት ፈረንጅ ጋር እንሄዳለን። ስንፈልግ አንድ ነገር ለማድረግ ስንፈልግ ሮጠን ተንጠልጥለን ፈረንጅ ጋር እንሄዳለን። አላወቁም። እነሱ ሳይፈጠሩ መፈጠር አይደለም ገና ሳይታሰቡ ፈጣሪችን ሀገር ፈጥሮ ለብዙ ሺህ ዓመት። እኛ ግን የምንመኘው አሁንም ትላንትና በተፈጠሩ ሀገሮች። ደግሞ የሚገርማችሁ እኔ ጥሩ ተምሳሌት ልሁናችሁ። ዞሬ ስላየኋቸው በ31 እና 2 ዓመት ሙሉ ዞሬያቸዋለሁ። ይሄን የምታዳምጡ እስቲ ሰላም ለማምጣት ሰላሙን ከአውሮፓና ከአሜሪካ ከምን እንዲመጣልን ከዩናይትድ ኔሽንስ እንላለን። በጣም በእውነት ስህተት ነው። እኛው ራሳችን ውስጥ ነው ሰላም ያለው። እኛው ኢትዮጵያኖች በራሳችን እንፈታዋለን።
What can I say? I mean, well, he's really speaking to an audience of one man. This is what Abiy wants to hear, and he's speaking to Abiy because this is a man that has his own properties, hotels everywhere. He has to please the man on the throne. So the address is directed towards Abiy because basically he's echoing Abiy. I mean, you don't need to be civilized or have a history of 1,000 years to tell two sides that are fighting, you need peace, and I'm here to help you. I mean, China could do that, Eritrea could do that, Russia could do that. Anybody could do that if they had good faith and if what they're seeking is peace between two belligerents. So it doesn't make any sense what he's talking about. He's talking about Ethiopia's exceptionalism and that we can make peace. He said, "On by yourself." Why don't you do it then? Why don't you just make peace then? Why don't you yourself, Haile Gebrselassie, be the peace emissary rather than the war emissary that you have been all along? So it's not worth talking about him, but you asked me about him, and he's really echoing Abiy and speaking back to Abiy. But just use that as segue about the possibility of a negotiated peace. I've said this many times, and I will repeat it again. It's not going to happen while Abiy is in power. It's not going to happen. There are two reasons, many, but I'll just highlight two. The first is personal. Abiy is schizophrenic. I know this. I'm going to give you one vignette about this. Before this war, when the difference between the TPLF and himself started, I asked him, what is your problem if they govern themselves in their own region? And he said, you don't know the intelligence that I have. They are out to kill me. That's what he said. They're all working day and night to kill me, is what he said. He cannot make peace because he is afraid that if they win, they will kill him personally. That's his problem. Last week I said that he's fighting a war in his own mind. He's fighting against the TPLF and OLA because he has personal issues with these two organizations. He knows all the TPLF leaders. They were his bosses. These are the people that took him from the street. The TPLF people that he dehumanizes and today picked him up from the street, gave him, recruited him to the army, gave him positions. But then when he was the Minister of Science and Technology, he was unable to perform at the federal level. And under Hailemariam Desalegn, he was sent back to Oromia because he was evaluated and he could not really perform as a minister. That's what happened to him. He has personal issues. When he was at INSA, he had personal issues with General Taklabrahman. I don't want to go into it, but he has issues, personal issues. He cannot make peace. Abiy cannot make peace. He will find all kinds of reasons in this world to try to win. That's the personal issue. A schizophrenic cannot sit down with someone that has power and then negotiate. It's not going to happen while Abiy is on one of the sides of the negotiating table. This is not going to happen for political reasons as well. The Prosperity Party is basically divided today. You can see indications of that. It is divided between the Oromo and the Amhara, and Faisal, you alluded to that earlier. The Amhara PP had already created a private network of Amhara generals, some who were not in the military, but called back into the military. They had built a network, a different command within the Ethiopian National Defense Forces, the high-ranking military generals. Once that was discovered, it's then that the Oromo generals also said, what's going on? This is going to tear the military apart, and if it tears the military, it's going to tear the country apart. So they started talking to each other. So what is happening in the military is the division in the political body politic has found its way out into the military structure itself. So there is a civil war within the military, and house that is divided cannot win. Abiy cannot do a damn thing about this thing. Therefore, the negotiated peace is not going to happen for personal and for political reasons. It is like pursuing the wind while Abiy is in power. And I'm glad that Faisal was able to see that the end in sight for him is calamities. So he will do, there is some cost there. He will do everything to try to win and obviate a possibility that he might lose in the battlefield, and then his power, and then it comes to him personally. With this mindset, it's not going to happen. What he's looking to is the abyss, and he will do until he dies, or until he goes into that abyss, he will fight.
Thank you, Zgal. Faisal?
Thank you. I think with the celebrity man, I will not go in deep into. It's just a general, again, reflection of the miseducation of Ethiopians who didn't get the opportunity to be educated. He's one of those, and that thing is seeping now into the larger middle class. I remember I was told that in the 1970s, Somalis who first went to General Wingate High School, people who come from the highland will ask them, oh, are you guys here on scholarship from Somalia? So they didn't even know close to 1/4, 1/5 of Ethiopia's landmass is the Somali region. So this exceptionalism and miseducation now became highly politicized to a point where this guy who's receiving wheat from the West wants to say, yeah, we don't want them to come around. So that's just very sad. I'm glad, Scale touched some of those, PP contradiction. I just want to add to his point that the person who said, or at least, shared that information with a friend of mine who was also a general, Oromo. And he was very sad, angry about how Isaias created an entity that's parallel to the one that Abiy, thinks he's presiding. So it would be just a matter of time, as the Scale said. It's already brewing, but when and how, we don't know. I think I share with you guys that Abiy may not be the solution. I think some alternative solution may come from some of the Oromo groups. How and when, and we don't know. But if any thing short of complete annihilation of each other, I think Oromo elites who brought Abiy initially before he becomes a monster need to do something. The nation now recognizes that Oromos have the largest number of population. Of course, democracy is for the minority, but the majority needs to be guardian and safeguard this. I think the only way, in my opinion, that this quagmire can be a passe and we can get out of this is by cross-cultural work between some Oromo leadership, TDF, Somalis, and even Amaras who are not attached to people like Ndargacho, who just became a venomous, angry politician, angry of what happened in the 1970s around Asimba between him and TPLF and what have you. Such an older man who has grudges against shouldn't really be fanning the conflict, and we will talk about that some other time. But I think Oromo elites are carrying a heavy weight at this point in time, this time around. In the 1990-91, it was the TPLF with the EPRDF coalition that carried heavy weight, and we got to this point. They could have dismantled at that time. TPLF had the power at that time to literally dismantle Ethiopia. They chose the more rational, I think the same weight today is on the shoulders of Oromo elite, in collaboration with other groups, and they need to be more active, in my opinion, in this situation before a civil war becomes the main thing. Thank you.
Great. I think that closes our show, but I will give you, if you have any final thought, anyone who wants to use that. Duke, do you have any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, my final thoughts. There was a conference yesterday by the UN Security Council meant to talk about the protection of civilians in conflict, particularly food security, and it was very troubling to hear them talk very vaguely about what was going on in Ethiopia, and the general gist of everything. It was a 2-hour and 45-minute session, and a lot of countries got a chance to speak and to talk about some of the points and everything. But what they came up with is that to make sure that people get food in conflict, we should have peace, which is a fantastic idea to have peace. But what it says to me is that they have nothing in their toolkit to try to break a siege. It's waving a white flag of surrender in the face of this growing threat of siege warfare in the 21st century. It's happening right now in Ethiopia, that any one of those guys can do something about, can speak frankly about, can do something, and instead they're waiting for peace to happen. And that was very disappointing for me. I want for this conflict to be over as soon as humanly possible, but it breaks my heart that it's been 22 months and they're still trying to figure out what to do about the fact that food is not being allowed into civilians. If they would have taken that up about a year ago, I started saying, you need to do food, then peace. If they would have done that, I think this would have gone a lot better for the entire conflict. And I think it would have gone certainly better for the innocent civilians that are being victimized through God knows how many different ways at this point. And so it's very disappointing that the international community has once again decided to choose the cowardice route over confrontation with the Ethiopian regime.
Thank you, Doc. Scale?
I guess I have absolutely nothing to add to what I said in my last intervention. That just following on Duke, that there is no hope that from within, not to contradict Haile Gebrselassie, so we can, but I don't see any movement from within because of the problem that I listed in the international community. I don't know. Maybe they will do something about this because the ramifications of a breakdown in Ethiopia would be heard all the way to the Mediterranean basin.
Thank you, Scale. Faisal?
No, I think just as Duke said, honestly, let's first feed people and save lives, then we can come to the negotiation. I think if the life situation is taken care of, we can create grounds for peace talks. But when people are dying and being bombarded and drones are being hitting population centers, peace would be difficult. I think the world has failed Ethiopia in general, particularly the people of Tigray and Oromia, to just watch such a carnage without any intervention. They did intervene in Afghanistan. They did intervene in many other places. For them to just look at this as a lukewarm, when people are literally being under complete siege. I mean, it rarely happened in the world where people are completely in a siege that they cannot even get food except intermittently. It is just a shame to those who are saying they are negotiating. It's a shame to the United States of America to say they are creating a negotiation space when they watch people dying because of one side that is party to the negotiation is refusing to let food come in for people to just it's US cannot, history will revisit this issue, and US negotiators cannot escape from this blame, period.
Thank you. And I just want to finish with sharing this post from the Martin Luther King Junior Center today. They on their official Twitter account, they said a list of we haven't forgotten notes. So we haven't forgotten about Jackson. We haven't forgotten about Tigray. We haven't forgotten about Flint and so on, and Pakistan, World House. There are a number of sufferings, and maybe like Scale and Faisal mentioned the other week, Tigray now is, I think, the largest and the longest area to be sieged for so long time, and the world is watching. Thank you for your time, and I do really hope to get back to you, and we come together again maybe next week. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. You have been following us live on UMD Media's YouTube channel, but also in the Horn on satellite. And thank you for watching. Please share, like, so that many can access our material. This has been the Edge panel for this week. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye.